also on our steering committee. We have council members, Mayor Wayne Tuggle is back, and Bernie Moore, council members as well. Come in, Randy, Jerry, how you doing? And let's see, is anybody else? We have steering committee members meeting here as well, so Sarah was members of the city staff. So again, thank you for being here. This is this sort of part of what we're doing with the strategic plan for the city of Eden. I think everyone at this point, those of you that are here, do know that this is the vision and the strategic plan, and this is part of what we're doing. I think the other thing that's important for everyone to know as well is that, to my knowledge, this is the only vision and strategic plan that has been sanctioned by the city of Eden. And we're 50 years old this year. So I guess you could say it's about time. So let's make sure we get the good information in today. Tom, and I'll introduce Tom in just a moment, but Tom is going to do a presentation today about the economic assessment of Eden. For many of you, this is probably not going to be much new. There may be some new pieces and parts in there for you. But what's going to be really important is what's done at the end, and that is the assessment is where we are. What you provide back, and where what we want to do with that information is where we want to be. So your input of this is probably the most critical part of this presentation today. So please do that. Now, we have Christy Carter with us, who is our consultant for JMT, Tom Keith. I'm sorry all of you weren't here earlier, because between Sean Gorman and Tom, I learned about German culture, what you can and can't do, what they don't know. And from Tom, if you want someone with experience as an economic developer, think about him being a sheep herder, working on an oil rig, and now blending all of that into our economic assessment as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom at this point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Look forward to it. Thanks for everybody being here. This is important for me that you're here, and I'm glad it's this group. You always want more people, but actually I think I have a room full of decision makers or people that know the community. Very briefly about myself, besides being a sheep herder, I was a sheep herder, and I did work offshore oil in another life. But for the last 20 years, I've been doing, I'm a research economist, and I've been working with communities. So I work with economic development agencies, I work with corporations, and I have done a lot of site selection work, which I know you're interested in that perspective. But my job is really the number cruncher for the community level. So I'm usually hired, I've been hired by Deloitte, I've been hired by a lot of firms out of the Atlanta area for years, to be the guy that comes in there and just says what's going on. Usually not the guy to say what my opinion is. And so you won't be seeing much of my opinion in this. You'll be seeing a lot of data, the data that I see every day. Some of this, as you've already heard, you may already know. And so it is what it is. It's for us, it's a great way to set a framework to begin to build something from. In the 20 years, one thing I've realized is very, very few, if probably none, communities ever know what's going on in their own economy. They pick up little bits and pieces from their neighbors, from the newspaper, from TV, and they cobble that together and they say, here's what we think is going on, and rarely do they ever know. So I worked with the city of Atlanta for quite a while, with the Atlanta Development Authority on retainer, and even though they were a huge community with a lot of people and a lot of money, believe me, they didn't have a lot of time to know what was going on either. So it was always very valuable for me to come up in front of their commissioners and say, here's what's really going on. So I've got some slides here. I'll go through them rather quickly. I think we're small enough group, if it's okay, if you want to ask a question during the slide, make sure to ask it, because I don't want to wait to the very end. And at the very end, I want to start getting some of your feedback. That's really important for me. And I will say that no matter what project I work on, I do work usually outside of the community beforehand, which is sort of important. And that is to come in like I am right now. I've never been to Eden. By the way, I live in Haywood County, so it's not that far away. But I don't know anything about the area but what I see in the numbers until I actually am in the community. That's most communities like it that way because you get the advantage of not being biased at all to come in and say, here's what the numbers say. Let's go on from there. These are the same numbers that I would be looking at, by the way, if I was doing site selection work. So it's the same thing with site selection work. I was talking to Chrissy this morning. It's sort of funny with the site selection work. Usually what happens is you identify a few states early on, and you begin to get materials mailed to you about how beautiful the city is, the quality of life, and these wonderful things. And I've been asked, what do I do with that? And unfortunately, most of that ends up in the garbage can because at the end of the day, you have to make a business decision, a business case, and it can't be based on just it's a nice place and it's we love it and our kids love it. You have to actually have something hard and solid to grasp onto and build that business case. So that being said, really quickly what this is, it's an objective view, as I said, from outside eyes. It's not a storyline. You're not going to say, oh, I know we are this, and this is what it's all about. It's going to be a lot of stuff, and it's going to be probably a little bit all over the place. It may not weave itself together, but this is just the first ingredients to what we're going to say what's going on in the area and your opportunities and such. It's grounded by solid data. As I tell a lot of my clients, really, I'm never the smartest one in the room, but I'm probably the smartest one as far as knowing where the data is and how to use the data. That's really my one pony trick, is I know the data. So this data you're going to see is the best out there and the most recent. You'll see a lot of it is 2014, but at the municipal and local level, that's usually about as good as you get a year and a half behind. It's lacking, as I said, an important component, and that's local knowledge and insight, and that's you. I'm always looking for what's different and unique about a place. Remember, you're building that business case, and at the end of the day, if you're going to a site selector or you're going to a corporation, you want to say, here's the difference that we have. Here's the asset that we have that other places don't have, or the combination. It's a means to detect distinct characteristics, trends, and opportunities. And as I mentioned too, it's a framework to build from. So a lot of this information you're going to see, it's going to be like, this is not really good. And I'm not really necessarily looking at good or bad. I'm just looking at the data to where you can build from. So you don't want to build on something that doesn't exist. About 2 weeks ago, I was hired by a bank to come into their board, and they closed the doors. It was a big secret meeting. They wanted to know what was going on with that community. And so I did a similar presentation for them. And at the end of the presentation, the bank president actually said, so are things good or bad? And I said, well, you probably weren't listening. That's not the point of the presentation is not for me to tell you, is it good or bad? It's to educate you, to give you some facts, to give us some facts, to build some reliable, real life, real world decisions on, not just things that we think might work or directions we might want to go, but things where there's really data behind it. And if you're going to be working at a tracking industry, then that's the only way you go. You can't go on your opinions. So we start out with an internal view. The first thing I always look at is total population. And this is 2015, actually goes at the very end of 2015. And you probably all knew you were losing population. Probably no surprise here. News to me. The Census Bureau released data for population just a few months ago for 2015 for municipalities in North Carolina, cities, towns, and villages. And I ranked them all. There's 1,014, 60% are growing and 40% are declining. So you're not alone. I'm sure you've looked at many small communities in North Carolina are in a similar situation. If I were to rank from the fastest growing to the slowest growing, you would rank 1,059. So down in the bottom third. But it's good for you to know. I've done some work with retailers, and this is a scary chart for them. So you need to know that. You know, they're looking at where's the client base going to be in a few years. I look at the rate of growth here, and I tried to compare yourself to North Carolina, the state, the county, and the nation. This is just annual population rate of change. Eden is the bar. I hope that's not too confusing. And it's just to line everybody up together and say, okay, how do you compare? And as you can see North Carolina with the big housing bubble there, up to almost 2% annual growth rate. They're down now about 1 with the nation. And you can see there might be a little bit of, I'll pick this screen by the way. You can see the declines are, this is I think 0.2%. So you're almost to a point now, and if you extrapolate that out, you might be actually growing. And this is actually to support that. This is the sources of population change. They only do this at the county level. I couldn't do this for Eden. And population only changes for 3 reasons. You either attract people domestically, internationally, or you grow your own, which means the natural is you grow more babies than people who die. And so this is, in Rockingham, you can see that the international growth has been relatively stable. That natural has been declining, which typically means an older population, so there's not more children being born than old folks dying. And then you can see that the real wild variable has been domestic, which has been domestic outmigration, meaning people leaving for somewhere else. But you can see in 2014 and 2015 a little bit of a switch, not a huge one, but the county, and maybe part of that is even Eden, is beginning to attract people domestic. This is net, so you're always going to have people coming and going, but this is net. So a bit of a turn there. And by the way, this is not unique. There's a lot of communities that have, especially post-recession, saw a lot of folks moving out, especially if your community is workforce driven. Median age is another important one. This doesn't show you a whole lot. The next slide gets in a little bit better detail, but you can see your median age is a little bit older than the North Carolina and the nation, but a tad below Rockingham. And I'm going to, this is really hard to understand as looking like that, but I'm going to help break it down to you where you fall out as far as age groups. And I thought I would look at the common generations we hear about a lot. And if you were to bunch these groups up, you find out the millennials who are aged 15 to 34, that's 34% of your population, and then the state and the nation, it's about 27%. So a few percent less than millennials. The Xers, X generations, was 35 to 49. You and the state and the nation are about the same, about 17% of your population. And then the one where many of us in this room are members of, proudly or not, are the baby boomers, which are about 50 to 69 years old. That makes up 26% of Eden's population, and in the nation and the state, that makes up 24. So a little bit higher on the baby boomer, a little bit lower on the millennials, and then those age groups that don't get a title, one of them are the plus 70s, and there's quite a difference there. For the population over the age of 70, that comprises 14% of the population in Eden, and nationally and statewide, that's 9%. So a considerably larger chunk older. And then we can't forget that last group under the age of 15. And this is interesting, and this might be something to think about for your future. In the state and the nation, that comprises about 19% of the population. But in Eden, it's actually 20%. So that younger, you got a little bit of a younger bubble, and I think it's the 10 to 14. It's working its way in there. So you're not out of young people. You got plenty of older people, and you got younger people that are still here, and actually a slightly larger portion than in the nation or the state. Obviously, one of the important components for any site selection work or any assessment is to look at educational levels. And this is kind of a confusing chart as well, but this is your highest level of educational attainment. This is 2015. It was just released fairly recently. And the bars, again, for Eden are the percent of your population over the ages of 16, and what's the highest level of education that they have attained. And you can see that high school graduate, or if they took a test to do that, that makes up 36.1% of your population. In the state and the nation, that makes up about 28%. So it's much larger, relatively larger here. And then on the other end, you can see when you get out to a bachelor's degree and graduate degree, there's a considerable gap there. In the nation and the state, this is actually 18% right here. So big gap right there and a gap here as well. So again, if you were looking at the site selection and getting down to industry targets, that's not a game changer entirely, but it's going to be something to consider if you had a firm that says, boy, we really need a lot of folks with bachelor's degrees. Any questions or anything? Is this making sense? Everybody seems like they're... Every now and then I'll do a presentation and then someone will ask a question and it's like, oh my gosh, I wasn't doing this right. But here's median earnings. Earnings are wages, salaries. And again, you can see even, I think the percentage is about 28% less. This is for anybody that has earnings. So we're not counting, part of that median is not people that are not working. These are all people that actually are earning wages. So in comparison, you can see it's relatively lower. We'll break it out here again. A similar sort of chart. This is, these are annual, obviously, annual median earnings. And a few things to point out here as well. You can see that the big gaps, considerably more in the 25,000 to almost 35,000, and actually less. And then even is lower in all the other categories relative to the state, nation, or the county. And by the way, those county numbers actually include Eden, so they're being counted in there. If you were to break it out, the percentage of household or folks with median earnings under 35,000 comprises 62% of the population 16 years and older that are working. In North Carolina, it's 42%, and the nation is 36%. So it's quite a difference here. And at Rockingham, it's 48%. So the other piece of earnings is household income, and income is going to include not only earnings, but it's going to be government transfers, Social Security, retirement, dividends, that sort of thing. But pretty much the same pattern with it is there as well. And about 46% below the nation. I should say, my first slide said the word economic assessment brief. These are a collection of slides from the full report, which has much more detail. So in the full report, I break out the different sort of family composition, family size, and number of children, that sort of thing, a little bit more detail. And there again, this gets into, so what's going on there, how do things play out, where are the areas that you need to focus on, what are the areas that you don't. And this is almost exactly to the median earnings. You can see there again, it's about it's 50,000 or below is where the strong dominance is. I wrote it out. Some sort of pattern there. Not a whole lot percentage-wise in the 50,000 and plus. And I thought I'd better look and make sure this hasn't been a trend. And you can see, because it's a small geography, it actually goes up and down, the numbers go up and down a lot. But between 2009 and 2015, numbers really haven't changed. And if I were to adjust that for inflation, I think we'd find that median household income has probably dropped over that period of time. Changing pace a little bit. Unemployment rate. This is not the unemployment rate that you're going to read about in the paper from the state, which is sort of an extrapolation of an extrapolation. This is from the Census Bureau. It's a running survey. Those of you my age or older would remember the long and the short form from the census days. They don't do the short form anymore. They actually got kind of clever, and they have an ongoing survey that makes up for what would constitute a short form. So now we're able to get 2015 short form data on a non-decennial year. So this data is actually collected by somebody interviewing somebody, knocking on the door, filling out a form, which is actually more accurate than that stuff that you get from the state, which is really an extrapolation from the national numbers and extrapolate it backwards. And it's fairly sobering for everybody because the rates are usually a bit higher than they would be published as well. And this is a number that we hear a lot about now, this labor force participation. Are you even part of the labor force? Are you in the job force? Are you looking for work? And you can see you're a little bit lower here at 53%. I looked over the last 6 years to see if that number has changed a lot. In 2010, it was 56 point something percent. So it's actually gone down a bit, but not dramatically. As anybody who reads any of the national financial publications would know, that this is a national problem that nobody's really figured out. We've lost a lot of people out of the labor force, and they're, for whatever reasons that we don't really know for sure, they're not coming back. And this really exemplifies it here. This is for Eden, and this is labor force participation rates by age groups. And there's a couple things that are a little bit unusual here. First of all, I'll point out the 30 to 44. Those are 30 to 44. Actually, your participation is a couple, half a percent or so better than the state of the nation. So those folks are fully involved, 30 to 44. And there again, you know the community better than I do. You know maybe who or what that would be and what's happened in that age group. If you look younger than that age group, from 16 to 29, lower. And the one that would cause me some concern, and this is not, remember, these aren't my personal opinions, so take that with a grain of salt, is this group here that should be in the labor force, learning about the labor force, because you want to get them involved early on, that 20 to 24-year-old, and even the 25 to 29-year-old. And you know the community better than I do. There's some reason that they have decided, or they're unable to participate in the labor force. And then on the other end of that scale, a little bit confusing to me, it would be the 45 to 59 who are not participating at the higher level. Now, I know you've had some major layoffs, which I don't think 2015 would get the Miller's Coors in there, but if you've had other major layoffs, that is something that has been seen nationwide, and that is a dropout of the folks, you know, in their 50s and early 60s who have left jobs that they were qualified for, and there just isn't that kind of job around for them. And so that's a national phenomenon, but you can see that here it seems to be sort of exasperated to a higher level. So hopefully you can help me at the end of this talk. Maybe we can bring that up again, and you can tell me what you might think that is from. There again, this can be for pitching yourself. This could be actually looked at as opportunity as well. You could say that you have some of those folks are out there available for work. They just, you know, they're just not here in the community right now. You could look at it both ways. This could be an opportunity for folks that are trained, perhaps those 45 to 59 are people that lost their jobs, perhaps in manufacturing, looking for a job, and it's just not there. And so for some potential employers, that might be an asset, actually. Here's business by employment size. This just gets an idea to your business demographics. This is not, by the way, unusual. About 51% of all your businesses are 1 to 4 persons. I looked into that, and it's the largest group, the 1 to 4, is retail, which is not unusual as well. And then it just spreads out to about everything else. The 2 on the far end are one manufacturer and medical, which I suspect is your hospital. And it might be Miller's Coors, might have been the one out there. And I should say, by the way, I use zip codes. Zip code 27288 and 27289, which is PO Box. And I say that so you can say you're wrong and you're right, but look on the map like that about capture it. They don't publish this data by municipalities. And then, so is that much different? So I lined you up against the state or the nation. And surprisingly, nationwide, there's even a larger percentage of businesses that are on that 1 to 4 side. And even the 5 to 9, you have sort of a notably larger portion 5 to 9. And typically, probably not surprisingly, as you move your way up, you're going to have less volatility. You know, the larger businesses are going to be ones that have been around longer and are more stable, and those 1 to 4s are going to be turning over probably pretty rapidly, which the next chart I'll show you that. And this is the change. If you look at this net change by size, you can see that it was on the small side, 35, which isn't a huge number. But I'll tell you why this is important to some companies, and that is sort of that entrepreneurial juice or energy. And so you want to see a lot of small businesses. And so, you know, it's you don't want to see too much continual loss of the small folks. You want to see people coming in because they think there's opportunity, and some of them we know are going to fail. But there's another number here I'm not showing you, and it's called employment turnover. Now, any of you that are employers, you don't like turnover, but as an economist, you like turnover because turnover shows that people many times are looking for better work, so they're advancing their way up. And so if you look at the highest areas for turnover, they're usually your most successful economic areas. So you can imagine like the San Francisco area and the Salinas net, or not Salinas, but down further south, a lot of turnover because there's new jobs coming up and people are changing and moving. And so this is sort of the other end of that. You want to see coming and going, but you don't want to see a net decline over a period of time.
Tom,
Yeah.
quickly, for example, the +3 on the 20 to 49, could that be people going from, businesses going from 10 to 19?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. You can move crossways. This is just a net. You know, it doesn't. We don't know who these people are and if they're jumping up and down. That's a good point. Understand what he's saying, that you can't move between categories. I did a study for 6 counties in West North Carolina, and they had me looking at detailed data for the last 7 years, looking for that jump. There's something called a gazelle we've all heard about, which are firms that work their way up these things, and they're really hard to find. They didn't find them. I didn't find them, but it's firms that jump up. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. It's obviously needs a little bit of explanation. That's something I do in every community, and it's sort of the fingerprint of what's going on in the economy. And I'll explain to you. If you don't understand it, let me know. First of all, the sizes of the bubbles are the number of people that are employed. This is Eden. This is within the city limits of Eden. And going from the red bar right, this is employment gains going this way, and this is employment declines going that way. So you can just see right off your big gains are in healthcare. Administrative services is something that is happening everywhere right now. It's really tense, and more industry are buying temporary employment. And it probably doesn't have as much of a negative connotation as it did a few years ago. But it is a way that many companies are dealing with uncertainty, and also a great way to sift through your workforce to figure out if you really want to hire this person. So that's been a boom. Now, most of that, if you follow that through, it's not available locally, it's available at the state, but most of that ends up in manufacturing or healthcare. So most likely healthcare and manufacturing are big purchasers of temp. Yeah.
You're correct about the healthcare. I can personally relate to that one. There's a large, my understanding, nationwide shortage of nurses. And because of that, we do have a lot of temps at the hospital.
That's a very good point. My wife's a nurse, by the way, and we still get things in the mail, you know, where you can work. So you can see that on the growth side, the right and left, where the growth has been, and where the decline has been. And then the up and down is the one that I think is a little more interesting. This is compared to, you can see it's local specialization compared to the southeastern region, which is the 12 states that make up the southeast part of our nation. And I thought that'd be a good comparison relative to the nation overall. And so what this is the concentration of employment relative to the size of your economy. 1.0 means you're right at where it would be in the whole southeast region. So this means, so we've got accommodations and food services right in the middle there. It's about the same percentage of folks in that industry as you find in the whole Southeast. And as you work your way up, you can see your biggest, highest bubble is about 2.2 maybe, which means you're about twice the level, a little over twice the percentage of what we find nationwide. And then as you work your way down, you're going to have percentages that are less than they are in the Southeast region. So you say, why is this important? You've probably all heard of Michael Porter and the clusters idea, where industries cluster together and they specialize. What that's all about is every community, and this happens at every community I've ever been to, and you can see right there you have specialization in manufacturing, you probably knew that. They develop and they specialize in certain areas. And that doesn't just mean they're good at manufacturing, it means you have a support system for manufacturing. You have a school system likely that supports that for whatever manufacturing needed at some given time. You have a supplier system. You have things that go behind that. There's a reason that manufacturing does good here or did good here. And you've got that whole ecosystem behind that. And so many times you hear a community and they'll say, oh, we want to be the biotech capital of the world, or we want to do this. And it's so far from what is actually happening there that we usually tell them it's going to be impossible for you to just recreate yourself into something else. A much better way is, what are you good at now? We don't even know why you're good at that, but you're good at that. Your history is, this is what you're good at. You've developed good at. Let's work from there. Let's work from what you're good at. That doesn't mean it has to be necessarily manufacturing. It could be, look at the skill sets that are in manufacturing. Let's work from that. But it's a good way to say, here's what we're good at, here's what we're not good at. Now, what I have heard people say, and it makes sense, is, hey, if we're not good at something, meaning we're not, let's say professional, technical, scientific, technical services, it also means you're importing those services, meaning you have less people doing that than you would expect for a community this size, which means you're probably purchasing those services outside. Almost every community except in the state, except for Charlotte, doesn't specialize in finance and insurance. Because, obviously they're exporting those very specialized services to many places around the world. So this is important because it shows you what you're good at, it kind of shows where you're moving to, where you're moving from. But for me, it shows a place to begin to look at what you're specialized in, what you've done good at, what you're an expert at, and we can begin to work from there.
Does the fact that we're strong in healthcare mean we could be exporting those services?
It does. Now, that's a good point. Are you exporting healthcare? You are, because there's more people doing healthcare here than there should be. Now, I would imagine the hospital serves across the city line.
Cross borders?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's a good point. Yeah, this is also called import-export. It can be, what you specialize in, you're importing and you're exporting. But I've always found it's a valuable way to say, what is really going on here? What are we good at? And the right and left, add and subtract, is not as critical because that changes. Now, I think that big ball up there that says manufacturing, if we put Miller Coors in there, that ball is going to get a little bit smaller. It's going to move this direction, and it's probably going to come down a little bit. There's a couple of firms, I'm trying to think of the name of the firms. It's Moody's Analytical, they do this, and they do them animated, which is fascinating because you get to see the balls move around. And what they will tell you, and it's probably a good point, sometimes they call this your emerging industries. And if you think about it, if these little balls are growing this way, if they're growing fast enough, they're going to be moving faster than the nation, or in this case, the Southeast region. If they're moving faster than that, they're starting to work their way up. So there could be some potential there. Public administration, by the way, is really just government jobs. I should have explained that.
According to the data, is there any particular area we should focus on that would spark more growth?
Well, that's a good question, and that's sort of why I'm here, and we're not there yet. I'm still in the feeding, and that's where I'm going to ask you some questions. We can, as I said already, I will begin to look at some skill sets of your workforce and that sort of stuff, and then obviously some trends of what's going on and see if we can match that up. But that's the exact kind of question. There should be, yes. There are going to be low-hanging fruit. And then I did the same thing with occupations. Occupations are interesting because you can have an occupation in, for example, production, but not be in manufacturing. In fact, I think I've heard little bits and pieces about transportation material and moving, which is not necessarily, that would be like truck drivers, forklift drivers, even packers and those sort of things. That doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be in a distribution or warehouse setting. But those are your skill sets. And this is the kind of thing, by the way, if I was with a company that was doing some, that wanted to look at moving somewhere, they're much more interested in this chart than the one before. They don't want to be restricted by the classification, manufacturing, which as you or we all know in this room, could be a lot of different things. They want to say, what are the people in those manufacturing, what are they doing? Can we use them, So very briefly, healthcare support, this is the Bureau of Statistics put these categories together, which is a little bit goofy, but healthcare support are sort of the lower end, aides, orderlies, assistants, and then healthcare technical would be where you would have nurses and even doctors and dentists would be in that area. But you can see both of those that we are specialized in that. Protective services, law enforcement, fire, security, that sort of thing. And then the ones, like I said, that you're very strong as are production, and then the transportation material, and material movement.
So Tom, if you're negative in food preparation and production, then that says you've got occupational potential.
It just means you've lost.
You've lost
You've
jobs.
lost it, and you're a little bit less than you would expect for this size community, the number of people that are employed in that.
But tying that to the, what was it, the labor force participation, where you're below the national average and you have people not participating, could it say you've got untapped skills?
Yeah, you actually could. I mean, if you-
Waiting for a job or opportunity?
If you, let me see, if I took those 53% of people and said, or the other side, not 53, we put them in these holes, you're going to be moving those bubbles up. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good point. That's connecting that. This is what's actually happened, what actually people are doing and working. By the way, this is really interesting data. This is, and if you keep me on data, you'll have to shut me out. But
On the right-hand side of the line, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a surplus, it just means that's what there's more specialty in the area.
on this
Yes,
way,
correct.
this is just growing. You just
It's
grown.
just growing.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
just
growing.
net growth.
Okay.
And I apologize if I didn't.
No, that's fine, I want to make sure I'm
That's
understanding this.
growth or decline and growth, and this is specialization. Yeah. Which is the other one. And by the way, and now I can talk about the data. So a couple years ago, the Census Bureau came up with the idea of taking your ID number, your social security number, and your employer has all that information, and they know where you live. It was probably about 10 years ago, I went to a meeting up in the Census Bureau, and someone said, from the state, why don't we just put all those together? Take your name out of it, because that'd be against the law. And so now we have this incredible data set. We're going to talk a little bit, probably quite a bit about commuting in a minute. But now, most people don't know this, but there's data sets that, here's where you live, here's where you work, here's how far you commute. You would never know it's you, but there's somebody in that census block or census tract. And so we get this kind of data that a few years ago would not have been available to us for municipal level. Get somebody like me really excited. So that was sort of an internal view. Those are my 30,000 foot. It's what, I would say, here's some big picture things. Obviously, I didn't find a big golden nugget. Oh my gosh, we should build on that. But it gives you an idea how far behind or ahead you are, and you can go from there. What I presented is solid. That's as factual as you'll ever get to what's going on here. But I know that looking for economic development strategy, and I know that we're going to be talking about targets here, what I would never do with a client is say, let's look at a city and stop in it, because they don't care. Industry doesn't care about where the city boundaries are. They care about where the people are coming from. Realistically, who would our labor force be? So here's the commuting numbers, workforce commuting. I guess I'll stick with one here. So this is living and employed in Eaton. These are people that live and work in this. How many of you live and work in the city? You guys are probably the biased group, but you can see it's a little bit of a decline. And you can see above is living, Eden, but employed outside. These are people leaving. There's a lot more people leaving Eden than there are living and working here. There's almost 5,000 in here. There's, I think, about 1,500 here. And then the big wild card out here that we don't think about, or you might not think about, which is bigger than all of them, and that's employed in Eden, but living outside. So that means they're coming to work here. I was giving this presentation in my own hometown. A bank there sponsored me to come in and give a talk. And the mayor was sitting in the front row, and he said, "So is that bad or is that good?" And I said, "I don't know. It's, you know, do you want to attract people to come in here, employ them, and then they go back, or do you want to do it the other way around? You want your folks to drive out?" And there's pluses and minuses to both ways. But you have a tremendous amount of workforce community. Bottom line is, and I don't know if you realize this, the next slide shows it a little bit better. I just took this out of the in-commuters and the live and work. And let's forget about those people that are leaving for a minute, saying what's really people that are, this is within Eden, what's the composition? And it's 80%, as in 2014, 80% of the workforce in Eden is commuting in. And the remainder of the 20% live and work. That creates some issues too. I was working, my office was in Asheville for a lot of years, and I done a lot of projects, and did a couple of projects for the city of Asheville right now. And they had some concerns because they're trying to push some political venues, and they realize that many of their workers don't even live there. So that makes a bit of a struggle if you're saying, we want to raise taxes because our sidewalks are getting kind of worn down, and there's a lot of people on those sidewalks, and local folks say, well, those aren't even our feet on those sidewalks. Those are people that don't even live here. So there's a side to it that actually gets into the politics as well. But you should know, when I present the numbers about Eden, that's not really your story. Your story is 80%. I just showed you numbers where 80% of your workforce didn't show any of those numbers I showed you. So when you do get to that point, when you're talking to a company or somebody to persuade them, you best let them know that what you see around you as far as the residents, this is just measuring a small percent of what's really going on here. It's really, the majority are people that have decided to come in.
So to clarify that, the bubble charts that you showed are only Eden workers?
Well, those are people that work in Eden, so that would
Okay,
be everybody,
that's-
yeah. That's a good point. So those bubbles were everybody that works here, which would be, we would imagine 80% of those bubbles would be in-commuters as well. And in fact, and I'll show it in the report, you can break out the in-commuters by some major industry classifications, meaning what are they coming in for, and what are they leaving
But Tom, for a rural county, is that really uncommon?
It's not uncommon for the live and work to be small and declining. It's a little uncommon to have that big of a gap, that 80-20. I mean, I wouldn't make a big deal. I remember I'm not showing you those folks that are bypassing. You've got almost as many people that live here that are driving right past those in-commuters, just going in a different direction as well. You look confused.
No, I'm thinking about
If I confused you, I'm in trouble.
it. I've got 3 hours to work out.
Would- Would that have anything to do with the distance we are from Greensboro? I mean, does that take into account, small towns like our size, maybe 2 hours away from a larger city?
Yeah, let me show you the next slide. I think it'll help. The next 2 slides will help. Yes. I think I did a project outside of, in Watauga, and they used to be just tied to the hip to Charlotte. And then they sort of broke, and now people are driving from there to Charlotte every day. If it wasn't for Charlotte, there wouldn't be anything. So here's the top 10 zips where Eden workers live. That means, people that work here, where they actually live, that 80% of your workforce. So you can see it's pretty broad, and this is just the top 10. The majority is still in Eden. But you can see that this is sort of your your labor draw, and I have a better map of what I think as a labor draw. And then, I think to your question, the next slide is even, this is where Eden residents work, and you can see, these are all at least 100 or more, I think. You can see they get quite far down here. These folks are driving a bit of a distance to get there. And the next map, by the way, I did it on GIS. This is just drive time. This is the purplish is 40 minutes, what it would take to go 40 minutes. And here you can tell me if I just picked a random, somewhat random spot. It looked like it would be a good center spot. It was the intersection of West Meadow and North Van Bruin. I said that'd be about the center. So that's 40 minutes, how far you can get from there. And you can see you can get down into Greensboro. So the other way to look at this would be, again, if you were talking to a potential employer, that's your labor draw. And we already know that that really is your labor draw. You know, you can see this is what's happening. That's what people are doing. So one of the things I would encourage you to think about is when you do your strategy and you think about how you're going to portray yourself and how to measure yourself and market yourself, is make sure you look at that labor draw, which really is your labor draw, which is much bigger than perhaps you may have thought of. And it's going to be a little bit different. I have one little chart at the very end that goes a bubble chart of what's happening in that region. And it's going to be a little bit different than what's going on with you. So although you have a uniqueness for your community, and that's important for you to know, remember though when you're talking to potential employers, you want to make sure, hey, look, this is the region that this site will represent. We're going to be drawing from all these people around here.
The time frame for these statistics are what?
I mean, for this one's 2014.
It's that year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, again, don't get me in the staff, but the Census Bureau did something very clever here. They look at primary jobs, which means that they only assign one job for everybody. So in a lot of the national and other statistics here from the state, you'll hear these huge numbers of employment. But if you had 2 or 3 jobs over the course of a year, they're going to count all those. And if you knew my son, you would know my son can come up with, he's 24, he can come up with 5 jobs a year, no problem. I was just telling Christy, he just left his job yesterday, I know another job. But anyway, so these are primary jobs, meaning everybody gets one job, and the way they give you that job, it's obviously the job where you make the most money over the given year. So it kind of tamps down a little bit of the hyperbole and says, here's one job for one person, here's where they're at. So there again, and that'll obviously be in the printed report. That is probably a more realistic view. And if you're not comfortable saying 40 minutes, you can go with that next line in, the sort of orangey one, which is 30 minutes, and then the little small one is 15 minutes. So you saw this already, and I'm just showing you that really quickly. This is the City of Eden. And then we're going to go next, we're going to go to that 40-minute drive. So here's your 40-minute, and this is really cool because I actually am able to go down to each census block, and I think there's like 4,000 something, and combine them in that 40-minute drive area and say, so what's going on there? Remember, it doesn't match any geography. There's nothing on the map. This is just your labor draw area. And interestingly enough, transportation and warehousing is the most specialized industry within 40 minutes of where we're at right now.
Can you go back to the labor draw map real quick?
The Eden map?
The colored one,
Yeah.
yeah, that one.
So you're getting into Danville, you're getting down a little bit into Greensboro. I don't know much about that Patrick Spring area. I don't know much about that at all. Okay. So, like I'm saying, this might be a better way to look at yourself, especially when you're marketing yourself. Now, there's not a lot you can do. If you're looking at policy to change, there's not much you can do in this area. But you can sort of go with the wind or go with the flow and say, okay, this is our workforce, this is what they're doing, this is what the area is specialized in, and we already know that they're driving across that area as well. So again, manufacturing's very strong, transportation and warehousing is strong, administrative services has seen a lot of growth. Management of enterprises are actually headquarters, and I don't know, I don't doubt if that would be as much around here, that might be more in the urban areas. And then my final slide is, okay, so that 40-minute area, how's it done? And this is 2009 to 14, and it's grown almost 4%, not as much as the southeast region. But there again, I would encourage you to look at this when you're doing your work as far as economic development, so to look at the broader area and not be overly worried that who are we going to attract, how are we going to inspire anybody when we have declining numbers, but actually in your labor draw area, it's relatively positive.
Tom, you go one back. Administrative services up so high, that could correlate directly with education rates. People are driving in to run our services here in the city, and then they drive home at night.
Yeah. One thing I said in the report I'll have on, I think it has by general education there, is who are you tracking and what level of education versus going out and staying here. So that would be interesting to see, is there a gap? You know, are the people coming in more highly educated because employers are asking for that and that's not available, or is it vice versa? That's a good way to think about things. So I obviously have to put all this in a nice big 40 or 50 page printed report, and there's a lot more. So that's coming. And then another one of my roles is to have some entry target selection, which I'll work with Christy and her team on that. But this is why, one of the reasons I'm here now is to get some of your feedback. And the feedback can be anything you want, obviously, but obviously I'd love to know things that uniquenesses or strengths or assets that you know of. I know water is one. My data would never pick up water. Water is one. Others, strengths, things that I should be looking at, maybe things that there might be data out there that would support that I just haven't looked at, or things that I completely missed. So this is really important to me, so I don't give you a report and you say, why didn't he mention that? Idiot, I completely missed it. Which has not happened yet, but by the way, my one that gets as close as I can, it's a great story, but you have to be there, is for a large pork processing firm up in Pennsylvania, which I don't think in the contract it said I couldn't mention them, and it's been so many years, it's been about 5 years, I probably could, but anyway. So I'm sitting around with the CEO and the board, and I'm presenting the 5 final sites that they should move their pork manufacturing processing to. And one of the things they said was really important to them was Hispanic labor force. Or some 5 sites like that. And the old CEO, the starter of the company, said, so how many of those are Puerto Rican? No clue. And he says, well, because we have a Puerto Rican workforce, and they can work with other Puerto Ricans, but they can't work with other Mexicans. He said, we can't go to a spot that has Mexicans. And it was a whole story that I had no knowledge about, the history of the packing industry. They came out of the Northeast, and they attracted a Puerto Rican workforce. And for who knows what reason, the Puerto Rican workforce would not work with the Mexican workforce. So anyway, the bottom line is I had to put my tail between my legs and go back and redo all the numbers. And Puerto Ricans in them, so make mistakes. So it's yours now. What I missed, or did the first question, did this sort of confirm what you thought was going on? About? Where's better? Sam?
I don't think I realized so many people were moving in.
Yeah, I think the commuting thing, that stood out for me. I mean, when I looked at those numbers, they're pretty strong. And you can see, I didn't point it out so much, but I said that live and work has declined a little bit, but the range, the in and out commute, really the numbers have stayed relatively stable. They've gone up a year or so, but they stayed within the same band. So those numbers have not changed. What I probably should have mentioned to you, and let's go back to One thing that I almost see everywhere is you see the impact of the recession, which remember 2008, 2007, 2009, almost every community you see something happening. A big drop off, a big gain, and whatever you did, you were somewhat recession resilient. I don't know if you've ever had anybody would tell you that. Yeah.
And would that have to do with the construction industry, so they didn't have a lot
Well,
of?
that's a good point, yeah. A community that was heavily in construction, let's see, I don't remember construction being, construction. Yeah. So, I mean, you don't have a relative to most places though. And I'm gonna guess that you probably didn't have a huge residential housing boom here, right?
And we lost a major employer in 2008. I don't know why that's not reflected in those numbers.
Yeah, that is, what was the size of the employee?
600 employees when they were, but it's interesting that Garner Economics did an analysis and they showed a major hit for the county in 2013 and there was nothing that we could.
But I worked for Garner Economics for almost 10 years.
So he couldn't, we couldn't figure out what he was referring to.
Yeah, now I know sometimes, like even I think Miller's Court, they don't just lay everybody off. They do it over a period of time, and sometimes it'll. You
Now,
can't
that was an anomaly that I've ever seen. I mean, they gave a year's notice,
Yeah.
but
One thing, another weakness of this database is it tracks where you get your paycheck from. So if you were to go out in that map, you're going to see a bunch of people working in Raleigh who are most likely government employees, and they get their check out of Raleigh, but they have a little office here. So sometimes maybe they were part of a group that, yeah, it's interesting.
Even though Miller had a number of employees, only 100 of them from me worked there.
Is that right? When did Garner did Rockingham?
last January of
I'll have to
16.
go look it up. Did they pick out anything especially unique you recall from the economy?
And like I said, we were just puzzled by that one
Yeah,
big dip, and it didn't correlate to anything we could see.
you do get those. I mean, once in a while, you just get one that just, you have no explanation. If somebody coding, I did a job in Oklahoma for what's the Lawton, the big military base, can't think of the name of it now. So they had some numbers that were crazy, and military reports a lot of their own data to the federal government, and they put census stuff. And the numbers were wild, and I actually called them, and they said the guy that collected the numbers had retired, and somebody else had come in, and he hadn't trained them. So the federal data was wrong because one guy hadn't trained another guy how to do the data, which is kind of mind-boggling.
But to your question, we were a finalist for 3 data centers. So
Ooh,
there's
that's pretty
strong power, especially at the Miller Core site. In fact, somebody's coming in specifically because of the power there, and that's got biomass.
How long ago was that?
Well, when a lot of data centers were looking around, before 2010, but it was Microsoft and
Oh, wow.
Google.
And it was, the power was what attracted them?
Yeah,
The consistency or price or both? Or?
probably both.
That's
Of
good.
course, water and sewer resources are, as you said before, too, strength.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear water, the first thing that jumps up is food, food processing and manufacturing. And along that same line, is there any industries that, outside of what you just mentioned, that have come close or you think might be a good fit to the area?
I mean, we certainly have targeted water users because of our capacity.
And no successes or any successes?
Well, I mean, it's a moving target right now. There's a couple things pending, and Miller Coors has Jonas Long LaSalle is doing their marketing, so they're doing a global search for that
Oh,
for
okay.
that site.
Have they had any nibbles, do you know? Or?
We've got a couple of things, I can't always speak about all of it, but you know, as far as the brewing industry, there's 5 major brewers in the entire world. So I mean, that thing has changed a lot, but I was contacted last night by somebody in food processing, so we're working on that.
We were talking about breweries earlier, you know, have we hit max breweries? And I think a brewery is not what a brewery was, obviously. You know, brewery now can be, well, so I do most of my work out of Asheville. So we got Sierra Nevada, and we got Belgium, and Sierra Nevada, which is a huge facility, but when you look at the amount of space that's actually going to brewing, it's relatively small. It's the warehousing, and then they have a restaurant, and they have a retail side. And so that's, you know, I'm sure Miller's Cooler didn't have that. So a brewery nowadays is a different thing than a brewery. It's not pure all.
You could put all the craft brewers in the United States and you still wouldn't come close to the capacity of Miller Coors.
Is that right?
They're 10 million million
Yeah,
barrels.
it's almost like we need to give them different names, you know, something retail craft versus the large guys.
But this area has always been strong in manufacturing. It's got a pretty diverse group. I mean, there's still textiles here.
Yeah,
And then we had a Indian company that moved here. They did a global search and they landed in Eden, strangely enough, but
And when was that?
2013,
Oh, and the name of the company?
SGR Tech.
Yeah, see, when I look at, a lot of times I like to look at worker skills more than anything, and you realize, you know, even if you've had manufacturing, it's not still here, and if you have something like textiles, where you know that some of those are very specialized worker skills, and the companies, textiles famous for this, will go looking for workers more than anything. You know, that's their number one thing, is somebody that can do that kind of work.
On the labor force participation by age group, particularly if you look at the lower age, which is kind of underrepresented. I'm racking my brain, of course, I can think of reasons why I think these were not, but that's not because they're working someplace else outside of these. They're just not.
That's a question. Are you working, you know, are you participating? Are you looking for a job or are you working? No, that puts you, that was just for residents. Yeah, it's a little perspective, you know, confusing. What else do I need to know? Anything I need to,
We've got a mega park right up the road in Virginia.
yeah, we've been talking about that, yeah.
And that's where I have the unenviable task of finding $16 million to run a water line, which should be easy. But we're going to be running water, and so we've already run our sewer line, so that we're hoping will take care of some of our water needs because our facility's so large. But it's a regional effort between us and Pittsylvania County and the city of Danville. So this started, it's been held up for 6 years by the federal government, despite the fact that Southside Virginia is the most depressed area in Virginia. But we just got news today, they are starting to clear 3 sites on Monday morning, and there are 2 prospects. One is doing their due diligence, a power company, another one is getting ready to announce. So when you look at Eden, besides the Miller Coors site, one of the issues we're dealing with is there's really, besides there's some greenfield sites, there's no buildings left. And about 70% of people coming in, they want a building. So that puts us at a distinct disadvantage, and then, building a shell building can be $5 million and you may have to hand it to them. So that's the reality of being here. So our thought was to partner with them. They've asked us to supply the utilities, but they're in a much more advantageous position because of the way the tobacco money is run in Virginia is much different than North Carolina. They don't spread it over all their counties. They give it the most tobacco dependent. So the Tobacco Commission has put probably close to $20 million into that park. So that helps. And then they have the Danville Regional Foundation, which has really been the catalyst for downtown Danville, which has done a lot of nice work. But so it's really just a 2-state effort. And we have a lot in the same demographics, same workforce, that type of thing. So
Yeah, I mean, you know from this slides that you're gonna, regionalism is what probably where your answer is, regional cooperation. That being said, you also know this, and we were talking about this in the car. I don't know how many communities I've been to, and they said, "Oh, we have all this land," you know. No, very few companies give a hoot about land, and if you're going to start talking about an industrial park or something, you better have it almost all built out, which I know is very expensive to do. And so the bigger folks I've worked with, they want it all there. They just want to show up, or they want a building too. But you know, that's very competitive if they want a building. But an industrial site, if you have a developed industrial site, that can be a powerful asset. But just make sure it's not just a piece of property.
Well, it's going to say it's going to have two users for.
Yeah, and that's another thing. If somebody else is actually out there, you may say, you know, I think somebody made a decision. Is that the one you were talking about? What's it called? Berry Hill.
And thinking about strategies, if there's one, two, three initiatives that the city could work on to move a needle, do you have thoughts on what they should focus their energies on?
Not right now, but we spoken a little bit about this. You know, the idea of getting a couple things going. In other words, I wouldn't encourage you to do one thing. Let's put all our money into Berry Hill or something like that, because you know a lot of those things don't. The economy turns on red, and you're stuck with it. I was on the staff to the economic development folks in Buncombe County, and they built a shell building a few years ago. Spent a lot of money on a shell building, and it sat empty. 6-7 years now. And the economy around it was booming, but nobody wanted it. They didn't know how to build a shelter. You know, you don't know. So I would say, don't get too excited and spend a whole lot of money on whatever it is. If you can diversify, it's always the better way to go. And there again, partnership, regionalism is the way to go. Let's say. Anything else? I have my business cards. If afterwards, if you want to grab a card and you want to send me an email or something, I'd be happy to continue the conversation. I still got a ways to go in this project, so I got time to fiddle around. This is sort of the fun time, by the way, where you just sort of sit and play around with it and you say, that's not important, that's really important. So everything's really open right now.
Are you having, I just came from a meeting, talking to one of our local manufacturers, not here, but in Mayodan. I'm just curious about the workforce issues. Are you seeing a lot of, like one of the problems we have is that we have companies saying that they can't get people to work.
Everybody says that. And I did this, by the way, with Garner. Garner Economics of Atlanta. What they do is, for economic development strategy, they have focus group of employers for 2 or 3 days. And I used to participate in those. And you almost have to bite your tongue and not smile, because you hear the same thing from everybody. They can't find the workers. So I don't know what that means, you know. I mean, that could be, is it the exact skill sets? Because you talk to workforce people and they're running scared, you know, trying to come up with STEM students and all this stuff. But there is some mismatch, and it might be a bigger issue than we get right now, but it's not happening. But it's not unique. I mean, I'm sure there's different gradients and not finding the right people. But
Would you say that would play into that, 16 to 29 age group not working?
yeah, they don't have the right skill sets. It could.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking?
And do you see a correlation in education there, or just job training, or what?
I don't know. I mean, I really wouldn't want to say I don't know. We all know that a degree isn't a degree. It's, you know, especially when you get something like an associate's degree. What is that? Associate's degree means to be more valuable than just having that degree. It's a good question, and it's a national, if not a global issue right now. The mismatch.
This guy from Ruger was telling me that he has people who've retired, and they're the best workers they have because they're used to doing that, but it's really the younger folks that like on a Friday afternoon, they'll just walk out if it's a nice day, so.
Well, and that's what I hear actually too, is you hear it's the work ethic, you know. And that makes you sound like a little fuddy-duddy, but you know what I mean? It's like you say, do they show up on time? And, you know, if they offer extra work, will they actually show up for the extra work? So it might be a cultural thing too.
I don't know.
I think that's what it is, I really do.
Cultural?
I've told everybody since I've read this book twice, it's called Hillbilly Elegy.
I've heard of that,
You
yeah.
ought to read the book. It tells you what's happening to rural white America.
Yeah.
And it's really, all goes back to the families. I mean, I was at this meeting and they were talking about, at the elementary school, if you get past a certain time, you have to walk your kid in to the school. You can't just let them off. And a kindergartner's mother in her pajamas cussed out the teacher, and the kindergartner said, "I'm sorry for the way my mom acted." So, I mean, but my wife worked at the local drugstore here, and she said it's just really bad. I mean, some of the things that you see,
Yeah.
not all. I mean, it can be. They were saying it's maybe 15 to 20% of what the teachers are seeing, but it's just marked. You know, but I just get concerned about that as we go forward. You know, that's just. You see the unemployment number like that, but yeah,
Yeah.
I get everybody saying to me they can't get people to work. So what do you? I mean, I don't know how to bridge that gap.
You call robots, probably.
And that, unfortunately, that's what will be the
Probably
solution.
will be.
And this is a different subject, but sadly, you know, I see that a lot as well with my age demographic, and a lot more so lower than me. I have a sister that's 15, and you know that's kind of very true too. That's what it is, but I really see a correlation between the expectations not being set for them at home and in family life, like you said. And so when it's time for them to go into the workforce, they think, you know, I'm entitled to do whatever I want, whether that's leaving early or not putting in extra work, which is a huge problem that our age group has to, not wanting to go the extra mile.
Bigger issues than I can tackle here. You didn't pay me to do that. So anyway, if you want to come up and grab my card or just tell me something, I'd be happy to. Thank you for your time. I hope this has been somewhat helpful. It's very helpful for me, actually, to gain this sort of input, feedback. Thank you.
One other thing too, I have asked Taylor to video this, and so we're gonna make this available to you if you want to see some of this again, because I know some of this was presented very quickly and everything. There will be a final report and this will all roll in, however, you may want to look at this.
Yeah,
I probably don't want to see this again. I probably don't want to see this again.
Force you to sit and watch the
May make you lose your hair, right?
Well, I've already accomplished that, unless there's some cyanide around it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You're such a ray of sunshine.